How's it hanging, everybody? We're back here in the next part 5 of building a full stack CRUD app from scratch. We ended the last video with some basic auth implementation for authenticating our users' information, and we're actually going to do some change-ups here as I spent a little bit of time on the documentation for Passport. It's been a hot minute since I actually went and looked at it, and I wrote a lot of this from memory at the end of the last video. Now, while this is a fine approach, some things to keep in mind. If you want to pass a custom message with our done functions here, we can actually pass an object that has some properties in it, for example, a message that we intend to pass along, such as invalid credentials or something like that. What I'm actually going to end up doing here is reversing the way I'm currently handling it, where I'm saying if the user is not found and if the password doesn't go, we can actually combine them into one go to make sure that says if the user is found, and we await this operation to finish to compare their passwords. If both of those happen to be the case, then we're going to do the successful action, which is delete the user password, and then continue with the user found information to pass along to our middlewares. In the event that they don't compare or the user is not found, then we are going to simply run the code as is here, where we have invalid credentials or invalid email or password. Again, we don't want to be descriptive in this error handling here, but this is actually how you can pass this options object from done null false to eventually our authenticate middleware we're going to be building in this video with Passport. So again, you'll see more of how this will fit in, why this little change up makes a difference in our login process. So at the moment, we see that our login router simply sends back a request body to us, and this is what we're going to be picking up in this video. So a couple changes to our logic here, and I'll show you why we're going to do it this way when it comes to writing a custom callback function a little bit down the line. So picking up in our post login router, as of right now, we have our request body being sent back. Make sure you have your Postman or whatever API testing your API or HTTP request software you're using, or just in browser, whatever you want. We have our login router simply sending back it's not sending anything because the connection is refused, it's not running. Got myself. So there is our server up and running. Let's wait for the Webpack, compile and output and bundle. There we go. Let's try that again. That's what I was expecting to see. It just kicks back our request body of information to us. So at the moment, we need to, and I have a typo there from doing some testing off video, guest@test.com. What we're going to be doing now is figuring out how this configured passport on our Express application can actually begin to help us to use this logic of try to find the email they're logging in with, which is guest@test.com. That's where that comes from. And then the password, this password, is password 123 that we're logging in with from the request body. It's picked up by this Passport middleware, and it's going to attempt to find that user's email. Remember, everything from the MySQL library that's selected is an array of objects. So we're going to destructure the first thing out of the array, which should hopefully be our singular user with that email registered in our database. If it finds the user and the password they're trying to log in with is correctly matched up to the salt and hash in the database, then we're going to delete that off the user's object of information and pass that along down the way to log in with. And then otherwise, we're going to send this as a response instead. So let's see what we can get going here. To use Passport as a middleware, like I said, the whole point here was to set up this strategy, this bit of logic to follow. And then we're going to initialize Passport on our Express application, which means we can start placing functions as middlewares across our routes. For example, if we need to protect one, if we need to authorize someone before they are accessing a certain API endpoint, or we are authenticating their credentials, for example, in a login. That's what we're talking about, folks. Let's go ahead and bring in Passport from Passport. And there is a handy dandy function on it called authenticate that will take a string value of what strategy we're authenticating with, and we are authenticating with the local strategy. So this right here, this middleware on our route, this is a route level middleware, is basically going to run this strategy's logic right here, meaning if it finds the email, the passwords compare, it pushes us through, and we'll see what that means here in just a moment. With that one little change, let's go test this route actually and see what's happening, right? So okay, I got unauthorized, which is not what I was expecting to see, but that's okay. I got a 401, meaning somehow the email or password did not match up, which means I might have done an error when shifting my code around, which is okay. I tend to do goofy mistakes like that every now and again anyhow. So there shouldn't be a problem here. I don't know why I got unauthorized. Because the user was definitely found. My autosave is on, because that's something I did off camera before. Oh, there's a big old error. I tried to send headers more than once. I know why. Well, first off, I know why this happened. I don't know why the 401 happened, but I know why I got this error saying the login sessions are not enabled. That's because over here in authenticate local, I need to pass an additional arg called session false to tell it I'm not using sessions in this particular instance. We are simply going to be generating a token down the line here and sending it as a response, and that right there should not be what happened, but I don't think that's going to be the issue. Okay, clearly it was the issue. Interesting enough. All right. I guess, okay, that's interesting. I learn something new every day on video. What can I say, y'all? So I guess because we had this error with sessions not being supported, and I didn't specify that on my middleware here with this optional object and property, it threw an error. So that's what I was seeing. That's why, and it was like, well, I don't know if I can work this. So it ended up throwing an error and saying, hey, we're just going to 401 unauthorize you because the person's code sucks and they didn't authorize sessions here. So good to know. All right, well, with that included there, we got the response I was looking for in the first place, which was man, what crashed now, yo? Right after end. Hold on. Now what's happening? What is this insanity? The library hasn't changed. I spent time on their website. You'd think I know what I'm talking about at this point. Send. There's a response. Is it still error? It did crash. Unhandled error event. Nuh-uh, you're an unhandled error event. I don't have an unhandled error event. I guess because I'm not catching it here. So hold on. 1 Minuten bitte. There we go. Let's see what happens now as a response, because the app has crashed. I'm going to restart it anyway just to be safe here, because now I'm curious as to what that particular issue that's happening is. I'm guessing it's because it's erroring out and it's not catching it, because it sends a response fine and it still manages to crash the app right after end. Unhandled error event. Hold on here. Back from a quick edit here, I figured out what the problem was like a doofus. So here's what's happening. I'm sending the request via Postman. It succeeds and it attempts to continue writing a response after the response is already ended, meaning when that write stream is ended, the server should be done, and that error is telling me that it's trying to continue to write a response after it's all said and done, which is an error that will crash our app right here. So what's happening, I figured out. The done function does not stop this callback function from continuing to run, and I put the return keyword there because I realized that even if the user's information was successfully being authenticated, it would run this, and then it would continue to come down here and try and run this. It would attempt to continue a response after one has already been sent, and the whole thing would crash just because I forgot one little keyword. I've said it before in this playlist series. I say it in a lot of my videos in the Covalence curriculum. Just because you've been coding for near 5 years, it doesn't prevent you from making small, stupid mistakes, but you do just get better at finding them. I think I paused the video and like 2 minutes later, I realized what blunder I had done. But yay, I'm human. What can I say? All right, with the return keyword in place, let's see what happens now. We send it, and we can keep on sending it without having it crash with an error, as we can now successfully see our successful login attempts. Now, finally, what I freaking wanted to do in the first place is start testing some goofy shenanigans. What if it can't find the email address? I'm going to delete the S out of the guest. Voila, we get unauthorized, as we can see something here, just like I complained about with how Express has a default HTML page as a response to a 404 error, which we wrote our own custom error handler to send a JSON object with a message property inside of it. Same thing here. We can actually write some custom code, a custom passport callback function that will, instead of doing whatever, this runs as a response, which is the 401 status code, which is good, and then just the plain text of unauthorized. I want it to look more like a JSON object like we've been doing, so my server seems, and my responses on my server are consistent. So again, that's what we deal with when we don't write our own code. We got to bump heads against their opinions and how things are written, and then write more code to fix problems around that, right? That's just how it goes. But yeah, good to know that it does work if it can't find the email, right? Fixing the email, finds it again. Let's try logging in with a bad password. Good stuff. That's what I like to see here. So, and as you can tell, I'm not really seeing this invalid credentials message popping up at the moment. That's because I haven't written anything to utilize that particular info object. So yeah, we are theoretically logging in with this authenticate function. And before we talk about what that ultimately should mean for ourselves here, let's go ahead and write our custom middleware for our passport authenticate function. So something I failed to mention on this error handlers TS, and I don't think I'm importing them in too many places. Ultimately, what really matters is the extension at the end of the file name, because that's where you're going to be deriving what kind of file it is, .ts. You'll see this pattern sometimes on projects where if it's like a very specific kind of code bit inside of there, you can almost add this like kind of like flair to your file extension names, where this will stands for error handlers.middleware. And I mean, that could be kind of overkill considering I'm importing it from a middlewares folder. Let's see how that would change the server level import, unless it did automatically for me with VS Code, which it did. Error handlers.mw. If you had this configured to not be from the middlewares folder or somewhere else on your projects, that's a cool way of also customizing the names of files to make it very apparent of what you're importing here. Something that I realized I did a lot on my other server-side project, and I failed to mention it here. So I just wanted to point that out. It's a cool thing you could do. No reason that you have to do it, but I'm going to go ahead and do so. So let's go ahead and add maybe a auth.mw.ts, because this is where we're going to have our authentication level middlewares that we're going to be taking a look at here in just a moment. And yes, this is what we're going to have to do is basically take what we're doing. I'm going to close the server file. We're taking this passport authenticate local session false. Don't forget that part, and don't forget that return keyword, folks. And we're going to be exporting out a function from here that allows me to use it on my login router in a bit more of a clean way, in a customizable way. And let's see what I mean by that. So we're going to import passport so we can access that authenticate middleware. And I do not believe you can do a named import of authenticate. I've had students try that, and recently whatever changes happen in how they're exporting functions from their library or typing's changed and messes everything up. So I'm just choosing to import the entirety of passport instead of that one authenticate function, have it mess up. Now, since we're writing a custom middleware, I'm going to go to my error handlers middleware and copy the import types from Express. So it's going to be the same. We're going to need to know those for this function of request, response, and next function. And then from there, I'll say export function handle login, like that. Sounds good to me. And with handle login, I'm going to go copy as well from my error handlers, just because I don't want to have to write it out by hand again. These args right here. And it looks like I did an arrow function here. I should be consistent. So let's go back to auth middlewares, and we're gonna change it to one of these, just so I'm consistent across my project. Because if I, for this one, I think I was been doing arrow functions, so I'll just continue doing arrow functions. It doesn't ultimately super matter. Again, just be consistent, right? And I'm trying to follow my own rule and not be a hypocrite on camera for y'all. Okay, so there we go. We have our args ready to go, and now it's actually time to write out the code of this function. So we are going to run that passport authenticate with the local strategy with sessions manually written to be turned off to stop all that goofiness. This now can contain a new custom callback that will override its default response types. And what we need to do is, because this function runs as a middleware on a route, we need to run this function and pass in the rec, res, and next arguments to it. So we're going to do so by simply immediately invoking the function expression and basically just daisy chaining, if I could learn to type today. Next. Sorry, folks, new keyboard. I rebuilt my entire desk, and I have a new microphone, as you can see from the previous videos, so I'm trying to get used to all my new setup here. So I have this new function ready to go, and what I'm basically doing is what's called an immediately invoke function expression, or IIFE, that you might have seen them named as such before, where the first set of parentheses is some kind of function where you might have an arg called pizza lol, and the second set of parentheses is immediately invoking the function expression to its left-hand side. And this is where you'd pass in, let's say pizza lol represents a string to do something with. And we're passing in our arg here that's being picked up as pizza lol inside of here. That's what this is happening up here. We're passing in rec, res, next to the passport authenticate middleware function, and we're simply daisy chaining in these to here as passing as args to passport authenticate, which is what it's already kind of doing here automatically for us, right? That's what the whole purpose of that extra set of parentheses is. I remember being asked that a long time ago when I first learned, when when I was a fresh teacher here and I couldn't explain it adequately. I'm sure that individual wasn't super happy with me. But yeah, it is c'est la vie, right? Live and learn. But yeah, that's what's happening right there. And that's all we have to worry about. So basically, we are setting up the ability to handle our errors ourselves if any occur, our info and info and user, I believe. No, it's reversed. It's user and info. Yeah. Okay, so error is self-explanatory. If an error happens, then we're going to handle it. If a user's data is here, we can customize our request object with it, should we see fit, and our info is here as well. So, error, well, that's going to be pretty obvious. If an error is caught and it's called done error is the first arg, that's what that error right there is going to be. So what I'm going to choose to do to say is if there is an error and it's not null or something like that, it's not undefined, then we're going to return and pass the error along to the next step, which should hopefully be caught by this catch next error, which gets daisy chained to our global error handlers should one occur. Next, if some info exists. Now, info is only populated when we pass something along with our done. If we pass done null false with no extra object with a message inside of it, then info is not populated. However, if we pass this object with a property of, it has to be message, that's just written into the code here to their library. If I pass a third argument to done with an object of property message, then this message string right here is what's going to populate the info object, and that's how we can use it right there. So what I can say is return a response, because at the moment, if they got here with an info status, that means something went wrong in the process. We need to 401 unauthorize them. And I'll now send my JSON message of info.message, and that should be good to go. And then otherwise, if we have our user, we can do whatever we want with it, right? So how do we know what to do with it? We can populate it onto the request object. Because remember, at the end of the day, our request object is just that. It is an object. We can add whatever properties we want to it, like pizza, and assign it the user's information. I know I'm getting a red underline. It's a TypeScript problem. This is not a JavaScript problem. It'll run. That right there is saying that, yo, dog, I don't think there's a pizza property on the request object. If it is, you should tell me in the typings what it's supposed to look like, right? What kind of value is it? But we could just as easily say that right there. Add a pizza property to the request object that represents our logged in user, and then simply continue to the next step of the process, which should be this code right here. That would be the next step in this process. So I'm going to remove this import and switch it to our import from up one more, middlewares, and auth middleware file, and bring me in that handle login function because it's going to be replacing this code right here like such. And there we go. Much cleaner, and we now have some custom error handling available from here. Now, despite the TypeScript error, it's compiled with one error, which I'm fine with at the moment. Let's just send it to see what happened here. There we go. There's our successful login. Let's mess it up and see what the difference is now. That's what I'm talking about. We set up all that extra work just so we could have a consistent response that mimics our global error handlers, which did I choose MSG or message? I chose error. Okay, that's fine. Trying to be consistent, right? So that's pretty cool, right? We can now write our custom callback for handling straight up errors, bad logins, and successful logins, all with our own code, so we can have our server handle messages in a consistent way. So like, again, if I had this, there's my object as an error message with the proper status code, login with 401 unauthorized, I want a consistent API response, and that's what you have to do to get them when you start using other people's libraries if you don't roll your own auth, right? Fun times. But okay. Ultimately, what is this leading us towards, right? I know in a previous video, I talked some about the request object being whatever you want it to be. I talked about tokens and things like that and how they're encoded and whatnot. At least I think I did, unless I'm getting my series confused, which would be funny if I am. I'll go into it here anyway. But yeah, how does this help us? What is this supposed to do for us right here? Well, we should theoretically be able to access this request pizza property after any step that comes after this handle login middleware, which is this endpoint right here. So rather than sending back the request body, let's see if the rec pizza looks like anything familiar to us, right? I'm now going to send this response on a successful login attempt. And wouldn't you know it, that is the information from our database. That is the, minus the password, Why is that the case? Remember, folks, we went back to our local strategy and we deleted the user's password immediately after checking it for success before returning done null user found. And that user found represents what it's found in the database, aka the user's information, meaning we can put this into a JSON, some information if we wanted to, into a JSON Web Token to represent, yes, this user authenticated their credentials and we have successfully considered this a good login, right? That's what this information here represents. You can put whatever you want in a JSON Web Token except for any sensitive information, because remember, they are encoded, not encrypted. Big difference. So at the very least, I would consider putting in their identifier in your database, because that's something you can do a lookup or a validation check on later should you require to do so, or if you're going to say, hey, who wrote this post, whoever's logged in, who's logged in, this ID. At the very least, I typically would call that the most important tidbit to have in your JSON Web Tokens, but we could also include their email, first name, last name, if that's not sensitive information. It depends on what kind of project you're building. So yeah, that's a successful login right there. Now we got to simply write out the last bit of code to make it an actual finished login and authenticated process. So first thing we got to do is we got to fix some types here. I don't think I've done anything with that yet. Yeah, so our types index is currently empty. We can make an express one here. I'm going to leave it as index and see if we can get it working. But we need to globally tell our project that we're going to change the property name later. A little bit later, I want to make it work with pizza for now since it's already going. But yeah, I should also point that out. Check that out. We added a new property to the request object, and it was available down the line after handle login as rec.pizza. So we can populate that rec object with like various values when it comes to our authorization process. Like if a user is banned and that's coming up from the database, or they have like a role. I like doing number-based roles of like 1 to 9, where 9s are my admin. So if they have a 9, they can typically get through anything, any of my API endpoints. If they have like a role of 1 or 2, they're typically considered like a low-level user on my database, meaning 1s and 2s, I have middlewares that will allow them to certain endpoints, but not to ones that admins can handle. And you can do that by customizing your request object as you move along the way. Again, you can add and detract anything you want from it. It's just an object, and I have to drill that into my students' heads all the time. But yeah, how do we handle this? How do we tell TypeScript what is going on here without having to just do a bunch of TS ignores, which shout outs to my students who have those all across their projects. We can actually add a global definition of what this type is to our projects. And to do so, we can actually say the following lines of code. It's going to fuss at me, I believe, and we'll fix that here in a moment. Declare globally. I think the keyword global is only available in modules, which will mean I have to import or export something or do something goofy with the extension I can't quite remember, or enable something in my TS config. But we're going to say declare global in this project space, on the back end anyway. In the namespace of Express, which is something we already have installed on our projects, there is an Express typings file that we have already installed via node modules, right, at types Express. I want you to export the interface called request, which is where this type that we've been using right here, this request type, capital R request type, I'm basically taking what it's currently doing and adding a feature to it called pizza. That should be what? Well, it's this object that's a bunch of strings. So ID, string, email, string, first name, string, last name, string. Well, if you recall from a previous video, I actually have this type already set up and ready to go, don't I? If we go back and look at our database queries users file, I have an interface that represents the potentially already selected data in that response type. So I'm going to simply write export interface users table here in order to simply head back to our types interface, our types index file, and now say import the specific type from up1 into DB, into queries, into the users file, and bring in that model of that table and say, hey, the pizza type will have the users table. And we're going to make it optional because we're going to say pizza is not always going to be available because it's only going to be available on certain endpoints. Right, so there you go. That should tell our project globally, and I'm seeing the errors go away now, that rec.pizza is of type users table. And it's optional, meaning it's not always going to be there. So there you go. That's a really cool way to co-opt and use some cool tricks to globally change an interface of a library you're already using. This is fantastic info here. I wish I knew this when I was a student, so I didn't have dumb TS ignores everywhere and things like that. Now, pizza, not a great property name. There is a property called user that you could co-opt as well, but I'm going to call this one maybe current user instead to represent this value, because that's what it's going to be representing, our current logged in user. I'm going to go to my types there. There we go. Yeah, that's such a cool trick to know how to do, to tell TypeScript universally that, hey, the request object that I'm using all across my project, my backend anyway, because there's no request on the front end, which I haven't gotten to yet, my God. Yeah, this is a new type property on it that's going to have that kind of a value on it, right? So it doesn't know what user is. In this case, it doesn't really matter. I just want some TypeScript support down the line when referencing my current user property. But yeah, that's it. That's how you're going to write that custom callback on that authenticate function, and that's how we can customize a request object to get us some valuable information at the endpoint of this login router. Whoo, that's a lot of words. So again, next step of the process here, right? I don't believe I installed it in a previous video. I have not. Good deal. That means I get to show y'all something kind of new here. Is it JSON Web Token.io? Or is it JWT.io? It's JWT.io. I actually redirected, so I think they own both namespaces or both domains, and they have a redirect on it. Yeah, so JWT.io. JSON Web Tokens are an open industry standard method for representing claims securely between two parties. My user has logged in. My server has authenticated that against the database, and it represents that we have agreed that this token now represents that claim between us that, yeah, you've logged in. JWT.io allows you to decode, verify, and generate JSON Web Tokens. I could take a look at what they look like. That's what they are. You got your header, you got your payload, and you got your footer. The header contains the algorithm and the token type. You can change and customize these. Typically, you don't do that through environment variables. Maybe you have one in development and one in production, or maybe for security reasons, you rotate them out every month, which will kick everybody out when they have to log in again, but it depends on the project, right? In this project, I don't really care how long people are logged in for. In a bank spot, I'm probably using sessions and not, headless tokens like this, or headless authorization, not headless authorization. Stateless authorization, not using that right there. In other cases, again, like you might rotate the type of algorithm or type of JWT you're using for security purposes every month or something like that. Again, it depends on your project. The payload, this represents what we are encoding into our token that would represent our current user, our claimant, right? In their example, they have a sub, the subject of the token, maybe like their ID value, the name of the person this token belongs to, and this IAT, which stands for issued at, that's done automatically by the library JSON Web Token, right? So that's when we issued this token, so we can use some math to check for an expiration date down the line, which thankfully the library also has built into it for us. Yeah, the payload can be anything you want. And the big takeaway here is, obviously, I'm looking at an encoded token, and it can be decoded here at the website, so don't put sensitive information in here. Even a salt and hash password, nah, don't put that in there. If it's sensitive info, it don't go in here. That's why I said, at a minimum, start with the person's ID in the database and go from there. If you need to add more properties down the line, go for it, but otherwise, start with the ID, and that's all you got to worry about. And then finally, you have your secret signature. Think of this like a royal wax stamp you're putting on these JSON Web Tokens to know that this came from my house and my server and not someone else's server. Hold on, it's blazing in here. My computer and all these lights are really cranking up the heat, so I'm turning on my fan off camera there. Okay, I was sitting here and talking. I'm like, I am burning up, y'all. Whew. Now I know why. I didn't have the fan on. So again, that secret signature is something that our server knows that you cannot know, because if you know my signature, that means you can come in here and change the payload. Maybe you're going to try hacking someone else's account to see what you can do and see if different ID numbers will generate different results. Maybe you find the ID of an administrator on the website, and all of a sudden now you have admin access. This would be a really easy way to hack somebody, so you're thinking, well, if it's so easy to hack somebody, shouldn't be a bit more secure? Yeah, don't let them know your secret. This is going to be stored on an environment variable on your server. It should be different in production, and you should probably, for security reasons, rotate it like every month or two, depending on what kind of project you have and if you have like tons of users or not, right? But ultimately, you're going to sign something on your server in a hidden fashion. That way, anyone can decode and look at your payload, their own payload, They can't look at somebody else's. They can't change their payload. They can only change their payload and re-sign it if they have your signature. So make sure they do not get their hands on that secret signature. Okay, so that's encoded and decoded, talking about JSON Web Tokens. How do we actually write one ourselves? We're going to go to our good old handy-dandy property here and say, property terminal. I cannot talk today. npm install. We're going to install JSON Web Token and the types for JSON Web Token, which will uninstall should they be redundant these days. They are not looking good, feeling good. Let's rock and roll. Please install. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Okay, now we have this lovely new library written in for us. We're now going to head over to our login router and complete the process that we are looking at right here, where we are going to sign our token. So they have both synchronous and asynchronous signing of tokens. We typically need to stick to asynchronous only on backend coding because we want to make sure that we write non-blocking code. To my students, I tell this to, it's always think of it like a fast casual like burger restaurant where it might take like 10 to 15 minutes to cook your artisanal fancy burger, but it's still fast casual and that it's not like a full sit down waiter service. You would go in line in front of me at this burger chain. You would order your burger and then you would stand there for 15 minutes and waiting on your order to complete. They hand you the burger, you get out of the way and pay for your food. You pay for your food and get out of the way, then I place mine. Well, that doesn't sound right. We know that's not how most of those places work. A lot of the times what happens is you place your order, you pay, they give you a buzzer, a flag, a ticket number, something to alert you when your order is done ready, aka they handle their orders asynchronously. So the first example is what blocking code is. The second example of them handing you that buzzer that will then buzz you to come get your food when it's ready is non-blocking or asynchronous code. That's what we're going to aim for in most of the place. But for now, we're just going to go ahead and do a bare bones implementation and spice it up as we go along, which has been the kind of like the theme of this whole build process, where I show you the like documentation, simple way of how to add something, then I spice it up. Same thing with like the auth middleware. We could have just left the authenticate local session false directly on that endpoint and gone from there, but I showed y'all how to spice it up a notch, how to take it from the bare bones to a little bit better than that, right? Okay, y'all. So we can do so with our handy dandy new library, JSON Web Token. We'll just import it as JWT from JSON Web Token. Hey, there we go. Cool. So JWT has three very simple functions on it. We have decode, which I never recommend using. This decodes it without verifying a signature. Sign, which signs a token with its signature and expiration date and tons of other options. And verify, which verifies it's not expired and that it has the correct signature. We're going to be using sign. Sign is a function that takes two required with a third optional argument. The first argument is the payload. That's the middle part of... Did I just click something? Misclick something? I did. Go away, Zoom. Now's not the time for you. Shoot. All right, we have our payload, right? This information right here, we see it's an object, specifically a JSON object of populate whatever data we want. In our case, I simply want to have maybe a property on it called user ID or maybe ID that represents the ID of our user. And all it needs to be is whatever value is on rec current user ID. Okay? So that's going to be our payload. It's going to be whoever is authenticated their login credentials ID, the person that my server claiming is successfully logged in. Second, after the payload is our super duper secret. Like that. That is our signature. Again, hard coding it in here and pushing it to GitHub means anyone can know how your server signs their tokens, begin messing with payloads, and then begin hacking your database by doing account enumeration by guessing IDs until they populate a bunch of user data. So probably not a good thing. So we're going to move that to an environment variable here in just a moment, but let's see if this actually ends up working the way I expect it to. So this says it synchronously signs our tokens here. Again, this process is so fast, I mean, I should be fine. I don't know if even the await signature will have any kind of use here. Well, it won't because I don't have async written. Yeah, TypeScript's telling me that it won't have any effect on this JWT sign expression at the moment, so we're not going to worry about it. We are going to simply, however, capture the token it returns and send that as our object response. That's what I'm talking about right there. And there you go. That is a successful login attempt. T is not defined, is it? T. Where did I write the letter T? Did I put it somewhere that I'm just not seeing? Oh, how'd that get down there? How did I manage to typo that on line 16? I was like, T? What you talking about, T? There we go. Hey, look at that, folks. We got ourselves a token over here. Hey, I'm the Brooklyn guy talking about tokens. Yeah. All right, so yeah, we have our token. We can take it, copy it, and paste it into JWT to take a look at what it looks like. Paste. And wouldn't you know it, we have the ID property. That is my user ID from the database. We got it signed correctly. We have an issued at date, which looks like a Unix epoch timestamp, number of milliseconds since January 1st, 1970. We don't know our secret. So if I try to nefariously change this, let's see if someone has an UUID of 6 in the database, right? It cannot verify the signature because that's not my signature, right? It's not your 256-bit secret. So we can't actually do that and have it successfully send back to our server, right? That's what's good about this. That's why we need to have that secret stored in an environment variable. Let's go ahead and do that now. We're going to head to our env and we're going to add. It's not being tracked by GitHub. So the coding I did off camera to kind of do some brainstorming and prepare for this video. Looks like because I'm not tracking my environment variable by Git, my Git checkout didn't remove this lines of code here. But if we look here, we have our JWT secret. I chose Legend of Vox Machina. It's a great Amazon Prime cartoon anime of a Dungeons and Dragons series called Critical Role. They took their popular Twitch stream called Critical Role. They have a campaign called Vox Machina. That's their DnD group name, and they made a TV show out of it on Amazon Prime. I highly recommend you check it out. Season 2 just came out. No, I'm not sponsored by them. I just really enjoyed their content, and I'm a DnD head. I mean, look at the name of the app. Look at the name of the project we're making, y'all. And then also, it looks like I was already talking about, or planning to talk about, the expiration date, which is actually going to be added via a third property after our super duper secret. So here we go. I'm going to use Legend of Vox Machina as our JWT secret. We can say how long we want our tokens to live for. We can either write math logic ourselves, doo-doo tier. I don't like doing that. Literal doo-doo water. Get in the comments if you know that reference. Or we can provide a string value of some kind. For example, 30D would mean 30 days, 1Y would mean 1 year, 30S means 30 seconds, 30M means 30 minutes. And it will interpret this string value we pass it and appropriately assign that as an expiration date. A lot of the times I just do like 60 days for all my side projects. It's easy and doesn't log me out enough to piss me off on my side projects. If I'm coding projects that will actually have a sizable user base, maybe a month will be a good time to make these things last. And again, I may in a later video touch upon this about technically we should do something like 15 minutes for these tokens because they're supposed to be short-lived access tokens. Because once a token's written, it's just good to use. And if someone gets a hold of it, anybody can use it. And we don't want it to last forever for them, so that's the point here. And we have a secondary token called a refresh token that will constantly re-authenticate the credentials that is the longer lasting one. But in our case, like I said, we're keeping it simple. So we're going to do 30 days, and maybe I change it to seconds in a later video when I show y'all how to actually authorize this token at a later time. So yeah, we can have a property called JWT expires. What we're going to do now is, because we updated our environment variables, we're going to head to our config index and add it here as a new property called JWT that will have our secret, which will be process.env.jwt_secret. And then we'll have an expires property that will be process.env.jwt_expires. Let's double confirm any typos happening here. Both JWT_secret expires, looking good. Okay, so we got our config updated. We have our environment variables updated, which means we can head here and successfully and hopefully say import config from up to directories in the config. And in place of super duper secret, we're going to say config.jwt.secret. Pass in that third optional object. Like I said, one of the properties is called expires in config.jwt.expires. And there we go. That is the optional object we can pass to our signature. and we can sign a token that actually has an expiration date of whatever I set it in environment variables. So I don't think I have any code on this project to recompile upon environment variable changes. So I'm going to purposefully restart the server to make sure it's looking at the new env file. Looking good. And yeah, let's go take a look. Login. Boom. New token there, y'all. Let's go take her over here. Copy. Paste. And yes, same ID. Obviously, the issue is at when I signed in, and the expiration date is listed as March 3rd. So I did 3 days? No, it's February. That's the whole month. March, yeah. And there y'all have it. We have a token being kicked back to us on a login. This is where you would probably store it, either on a cookie or in local storage on client side. We'll talk about that whenever we get to the client side. But this would right here is what I consider a successful login attempt. We log in with our credentials. We get a token saying we logged in. And that token has a signature stored in environment variables. Remember, you don't push that to GitHub. Otherwise, people can start messing with your tokens payload. Don't want that. And we now know we can expire our tokens as well. And we, again, you could provide the string directly here if you don't care if people know how long it is, or if you want to change it between dev and production. Like in production, I might do 30 days. In dev, I might do 30 minutes, so I can test like my redirecting and my auth logic to make sure my app successfully redirects somebody if they're not logged in, like from a profile page they shouldn't be viewing to back to a login page or something like that. Just things to keep in mind. Now, you might be wondering, well, on a register process, what do you want to do? Register our user, then kick them back to the login page and have them follow this logic? Or would you rather have our users be able to register and log in at the same time? If it's the latter, then they're going to be obviously reusing this code, which means it might be some benefit to move this code into a utility or service of some kind. That way we can reuse our signature code without having to copy and paste it all over the place, right? The more places we might be making tokens, honestly, only register and login is where we're going to be making them. So copying and pasting in between two different routes is really not that big a deal, but I might move it to a utility here just so we have it available. So I might say, utils tokens.ts, import config in JWT to tokens. This import will now be simply up one directory into config like so. We'll say export const create token. Now be careful with this one. we'll call it create JWT. Because create token is something that you can import from TypeScript, I'm pretty sure, and it's deprecated, thank goodness. But it used to have the ability to create a token from the TypeScript library, and I had a student that unknowingly imported this one from TypeScript and not this one they wrote from utils, and neither of us noticed the import statement for a few hours until I debugged what the problem was, and I was dumbfounded that we managed to pull that off like the buffoons we are. So, like I was saying, we have our function here, and all it's going to do is take this process right here and return that token to us. And we're going to write a try catch in case one happens, and we're going to throw that error, just daisy chain it along the way, which will be caught by this catch next error should one occur in this process. Write ourselves a token, and return that token from this function so we could use it over in that file. Now, clearly, I'm going to have to pass in the user's ID, so maybe that's what I'm going to start with as of right now, where I'll say we're going to pass in an ID that will be a string to start, and we can customize these args later. But as of right now, that's all I really care about to have in my token, so I'm just going to go hard write that ID string and call it a day. Okie dokie artichoke, which means now we can come here and write create JWT, have it auto import for us, and say const token equals create JWT, call that sucker, pass in our ID, which is our rec.currentuser.id as the arg value, and voila. We have a clean looking handle login. We have a clean looking login endpoint that generates a token for us. And we have the single source of truth, one of my favorite sayings when it comes to coding. If you find yourself doing any repetitive code, stop. Well, dry is this one here. It's always nice to have a single source of truth. Anywhere I'm going to generate a token, I have one function I get to come look at to see how that's done and not have to just copy and paste the same code to 5 different places, decide I want to do something differently, and then remember to change it in 5 different places. So if you can dry, go for it, right? The single source of truth is the magic sauce to good code writing when you're a newbie and trying to elevate yourself to a mid-level developer rather than an entry-level developer. So this video has gone on long enough already. I'm going to pause the video here. In the next video, we are going to finish out our authentic auth logic by coding out our registration endpoint to register new users. We're also going to code out another passport strategy to actually detect, find, and validate those JSON Web Tokens, and we're going to write another middleware to protect API endpoints as an example. So ta-ta for now. Hope you all enjoyed this video. Hopefully the new mic setup, the new lighting setup, the new camera gets here soon. So you're only going to see my quality increase from my end, at least on the AV side of things. My quality of code will always be, well, kind of my own. And I'll make the same dumb mistakes I always make. I'll also get better at finding what they are and responding to them with as little jump cuts as possible in my videos. So like, comment, subscribe.